you. All right, excellent. Welcome to the meeting. I'm Councillor Paul Hopton. I'm chairing today's committee. Within the meeting today, we also have members of the committee, officers and members of the public. Please ensure mobile phones are switched to silent. To avoid any disruption during the meeting, and also whilst you're not speaking, please can you put yourself on mute if you've not already done so, and I'll try my best to remind people of that fact because we all tend to forget occasionally. As always, fire procedure: if the fire alarm sounds, attendees will be directed where to go. Please follow the instructions given by officers. Okay, agenda item 1. Declarations of pecuniary, non-pecuniary and prejudicial interests. Members to declare any interests in items on the agenda and the nature of such interest. I'll kick that one off by declaring that my wife is a member of the East Riding Pension Fund. Councillor Whittle.
Thank you, Chairman. Likewise, my wife and I are both members of the pension fund and beneficiaries.
Robin?
Yeah, both myself and my wife are members of the pension fund.
Thank you. No one else? No? Good on. Item 2, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the committee held on the 14th of March 2025, where my apologies for not being present that day. Thank you to Councillor Holtby for chairing in my absence. Could I have any questions from the minutes? Could I have a proposer and a seconder for those, please? Councillor Casson? Councillor Holtby? I forgot what I was saying about mobiles. Can we also put Teams on silence as well, please? Thank you. Please, I wanted that meeting. You must have talked a lot. Then minutes were the longest I've signed. Right. Without further ado, as we all probably know, I think today's quite a short agenda. We've obviously had a nice long training session already. But without further ado, we have item number 3, which we have Tom to talk about.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So this is the latest version of a report that we bring periodically to the committee to update you about the treasury management activity. So this is looking at activity over the last 12 months. So there's a bit of background in section 1, but section 2 briefly talks about, I suppose, some key points in the year. Paragraph 2.2 shows that the amount of cash that we have held on average over the last year was around about 100 million, broadly similar to the previous year, but the cash balance does vary quite significantly from time to time. So you'll see in paragraph 2.1, the year-end balance at the end of March was 120 million, but the previous year it was only 50. Now, there are a few reasons why there are some big changes from time to time. One of the reasons is if we're anticipating a number of significant private markets capital calls, we'll start to accumulate a reasonable amount of cash to make sure that we can satisfy those. Another one can be just our views about the financial markets. So if we have more concerns over financial markets, we'll tend to accumulate a bit more cash because it's just a safer place to hold it. That then can we then can find ourselves in market conditions where there are opportunities to invest it, where market values in certain asset classes have fallen significantly, assets look cheap, and that means we can deploy the money. So sometimes we can have some fairly significant inflows and outflows for those particular reasons. Paragraph 1.3 mentions Appendix 1. So this talks about the breaches that have occurred over the last year. Now, we set thresholds for lending to various counterparties and the reason for that is to control the overall risk that we have with any one counterparty, but occasionally they do get breached. Now, in the appendix, which is on page 11, most of the breaches on there, I think there are about 5 breaches, are to do with when we've had money above the threshold with bankers NatWest. The reason for that is typically that because the pension fund deals with banks internationally, if we have money, for example, coming back from a US bank which operates in a different time zone, we might get that back too late in the day to deploy it. So it sits there as an overnight balance and there's nothing really we can do about it. That then gets deployed the next day. There's also cases occasionally where we know we're going to make a significant investment. And what we may do is make sure that the money is reserved the previous day. And again, the reason, and that might cause a breach. And the reason for that is that we don't have any control of the timing of the transfers between banks. So to be sure that the money is in the right place to satisfy the right investment requirements, we sometimes make those arrangements. So they are technical breaches, but I would say, you know, for reassurance of the committee, they're not a concern. The other one, which is slightly different, which I think we have mentioned before when we discussed the policy itself, was the Goldman Sachs issue. So prior to the end of March, the council and the pension fund were using the same counterparties with the same thresholds, and we had 2 teams working together to deploy cash. And it was just a failure of communication between the 2 teams where the council deployed some money with Goldman Sachs and so did we on the pension side. Now that was an error. It wasn't considered a kind of major concern. I say we did report it previously to committee when the policy was agreed, but just to remind the committee, the review of the policy took into consideration the experience that we've had on treasury management activity across the council and the pension fund over the last few years. And a decision was made at that time that separate thresholds should be created for the pension fund and for the council, so that we effectively would, from a pension fund point of view, we'd operate independently as far as these thresholds are concerned, so that there'd be no risk that we would inadvertently breach each other's thresholds. So again, I would consider that to be a minor breach, but that won't happen in the future for that particular reason. So overall, although there are a few breaches reported, which we inevitably do have every year, just to reassure the committee, I don't see any of these are of concern, but I'm happy to take any questions.
That all seems very reasonable to me, Tom, but yeah, anyone with any questions? No?
Could I ask one quick question?
Of course you can.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Tom, just as a matter of interest, when those deposits are placed, are they held as client money, or are they held as just overnight money at the bank?
I'll have to check the technical side of that, Rowan, and get back to you.
Can I? What sort of percentage of this cash that's held is needed to actually pay out the pensions themselves, rather than as an investment scheme, if you like?
I think in terms of monthly pensions, I suppose around about 1/5 of it tends to go out of the current balance every month or so. But, you know, that's something we're keeping a close eye on. I think that was something that was mentioned in the training earlier in terms of the balance between pensions going out and contributions coming in. Now, at the moment, we have more money coming in than going out. But as Julie mentioned earlier, with a gradually maturing pension scheme, the surplus that we have is reducing. And of course, if the valuation leads to employee contributions reducing, then that'll reduce that further. And eventually we will find ourselves in a deficit position. Now, the the recently agreed new investment strategy has an allocation to cash of 2% now. So that would mean we would expect a typical amount of cash held by the pension fund to be currently at around 140 million. So, part of the rationale for that was to make sure that we are providing a bit more insulation in terms of, adverse cash flows in the future, whether it's from private markets or whether it's from increasing pension payments.
So how much, as a ballpark figure, do we pay out every year in actual pension payments? You know that, Liz?
Just pension.
Yeah, £13 million a month is our pension payroll, but then obviously we've got other payments that go every month. So everybody who retires, you would have a lump sum payment, and then you've got your death payments and there's transfers, and all that is cash flow out. But on our monthly payroll, 13 million ish.
I think I'm just trying to remember what's in the annual accounts, but I think it's broadly speaking around about 200 million altogether, including lump sums and various other payments that go out every year.
Okay, thank you, Tom. We will now move on to corporate governance and voting activity. I think back to the same person.
Thanks, Chair. So this is a report that we bring to the committee every quarter. It summarises the engagement activity, voting activity, and other issues in relation to responsible investment every quarter. So just a few things to highlight here. On page 13, it notes that Board of the Coast have amended the voting guidelines in relation to deforestation. That's something that's there's an increasing amount of work in that area. On page 14, it talks about a couple of examples of shareholder resolutions that have been brought in relation to a couple of companies, Woolworths and the National Australia Bank. I guess one of the interesting elements of this is that shareholder resolutions can be brought forward to encourage companies to behave in a different way or report differently and whatever, but it's not necessarily the case that from a Board of the Coast point of view that they think it's necessarily required by those companies. So they might take a view that they're already doing enough. So shareholder resolutions may or may not be supported by Board of the Coast depending on their individual view. And this goes to support, when Board of the Coast come and presented before, they do look at all of these resolutions in detail and are quite careful about how they apply their votes. On page 16, there's an update on Board of the Coast activity on climate change engagement. Obviously, BP's been in the news quite a bit over the last several weeks in terms of their position and their view to in relation to some of the renewables. And the nature transition is starting to pick up a bit of a head of steam, and that's mentioned on that page 2. Robico, their advisor, is doing some more work on that. And also in section 3 on page 17, that talks about the local authority pension fund forums work, and a particular example there that's picked out from their quarterly engagement report on electric vehicles. So I won't say any more, Chair, than that, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Not seeing any hands go up, so we'll elongate it by asking any myself. Pardon?
Just for noting.
Just for noting, yeah. So we note that report accordingly. You'd like to carry on, Tom?
Thanks, Chair. So where are we?
Item 5, Board of Coast pensions.
Item 5 on page 19. Yeah, so again, a report that we bring regularly to the committee. There are a few particular things to pick out here. So I think on the pooling Fit for the Future consultation progress, the recent developments are shown in section 2 on page 20. So the latest thing that's formally happened is that government have responded to the submissions that each of the pool sent into which described the progress that those pools had made in terms of pooling assets and the plans that they had to pool in the future. Now it's obviously widely known now that two of the pools, that's the Access Pool and the Brunel Pool, were told that their proposals didn't meet the government requirements, and the government has written to those pools and to the funds within those pools, tasking them with finding another pool to join. Now they've been given a deadline of the end of June to get back to government on this, and I think with further plans on exactly how this is going to happen by the end of September. Now we haven't heard anything further than that, so but there might be a few things that I want to mention when we go into private session about these circumstances. But you know, in terms of you know what we can say publicly, that's just the situation. The other point is about what the actual requirements are going to be following the consultation. So we don't yet know what they are. I think the government has been fairly strong in indicating that the regulations and the statutory guidance are going to be very close to the proposals set out in the consultation. But until we actually see that written down, of course, you know, it does make it a little trickier to plan. Just relating to that, further down in section 7, paragraph 7.3, this is on page 22, talks about funds should have all assets transferred under pool management by the end of March 26, which is only 10 months away now. So this appears to be, you know, as we've previously discussed, a bit of a compromise position from government, where they previously expected everything to be transferred to Border to Coast. So this allows for investments such as private markets investments, which can be very difficult, expensive, or in some cases impossible to actually transfer over from the ownership of the individual funds to the pool. And this effectively provides for Border to Coast providing some kind of management capability. Now, there have been discussions with Border to Coast about how this might develop, but it's still at a fairly early stage. And I think Border to Coast would say that, you know, they will be able to deliver something by March 26, but quite what that looks like at the moment is unclear. But that's one of the things that we're working on at the moment before the regulations and the guidance actually make clear exactly what the requirements are. But we think we know where we're going on that one. So that was really on the pooling consultation side of things overall. So just to note in paragraph 6.2, that talks about some of the changes that have been made in the last quarter in terms of money that's been added or taken away from some of the Border to Coast funds. So this is partly about rebalancing activity, but it's also partly about cautious moves towards the new strategy, which was agreed by the committee a few months ago. Another point to mention is paragraph 7.4 on page 22. This talks about the investments that we have with Border to Coast that provide some level of income. Now, at the moment, all of the income that we get from Border to Coast investments, whether that's dividend payments on equities or coupon payments on bonds, is automatically reinvested. A few of the funds have now been set up so that we are able, if we wish, to take that income as cash. So just reflecting on what we were talking about earlier about the cash flow requirements of the fund, that's now an option for us to dip into that in terms of taking those income payments rather than actually having to divest as such. We don't need to use those quite yet, but as and when the fund's cash flow position moves to a point when we feel it's needed, then that's an option for us, which is very helpful. And I'll leave it to that, Chair. But as I said, there might be one or two things that I could mention when we move into private session.
Really. I mean, that last point there you made, Tom, just makes perfect sense from an investment point of view. There's no point in investing income to only withdraw it almost straight away. So Not seeing any hands up with any questions at this point. No. Okay, that was a very brief open part of the session. So moving on to item 6, which actually we do have an item on today. Any other items which the chairman decides are urgent by reason of special circumstance? Not necessarily urgent, but I do have Robin Waitman, our union representative, would like to just say a few words.
Yeah, I've been asked by the union to send a message of thanks for all the support and any influences you had over the Oscar Mayer situation. So it's been mutually agreed now and it's been put to bed. So thank you again from the union for all the help and support you've given.
Good, good to hear. Right, so, yes.
Yeah, so just to say apologies to the committee. I heard about this just a couple of days ago, but hadn't got round to emailing around. But I understand the whole situation's been amicably resolved. So, you know, we can all breathe a sigh of relief on that one.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Tom. Okay, item 7. The committee is asked to consider excluding the press and public from the meeting for consideration of the following items on the grounds that they are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. In making its decision, the committee is asked to confirm that, having regard to all circumstances, it is satisfied that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Okay, we need to vote on that. All right. Cool. And we'll close the public part of the